I was standing at the motel front desk, my coat draped over one arm, when my daughter slid my overnight bag across the counter and said to the clerk, "It's just for one night, Mom. We'll pick you up tomorrow." She didn't look at me. Not once. Her voice was polite in that way people speak to strangers they'll never see again. Then she turned, called something over her shoulder to her husband, and walked out. The door closed too quickly for me to follow. I nodded at the clerk like I was in on it, like this was some small inconvenience in a long day. Inside, something thin and fragile cracked. But I kept my hand steady as I signed the register. The lobby smelled like overripe oranges and disinfectant. A humming soda machine leaned in the corner, its light flickering. The young man behind the desk handed me a brass key with a tag that read 12B. His expression was carefully blank, but his eyes flicked to the door they just walked out of. "Need any help with your bag?" he asked. "No," I said. "It's lighter than it looks." I climbed the narrow carpeted stairs, each step muffled and tired. The room was exactly what you'd expect for $39 a night: thin drapes, a bedspread patterned like a faded postcard, one lamp that leaned slightly away from the wall. I set my bag on the bed and unzipped it, planning to pull out my toiletries. My wallet wasn't there. The side pocket where my phone usually sat was empty. They must have taken it for safekeeping, I told myself. But my voice sounded strange in the stillness, thin like it might snap. I walked back to the lobby. The clerk was bent over a clipboard. "Excuse me," I said. "Did my daughter leave a phone or wallet here for me?" He hesitated. "She said she'd hold on to them, so they wouldn't get lost." That's when I knew. There was no tomorrow pickup. There was no just one night. I went back upstairs without a word, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the drawn curtains. My breath slowed. My hands stopped shaking. Somewhere far away, a part of me whispered, "They didn't forget you. They removed you." I lay back on the bed, the mattress sinking unevenly beneath me. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps faded. And I realized the truth. I wasn't left here by accident. I was placed here, quietly, deliberately, to be gone. That morning I ironed my best blouse like I was heading somewhere that mattered. I set a peach cobbler to cool on the counter and slid a note under the pan. For Saturday breakfast, my treat. I tucked a small envelope of cash into my purse for my grandson's soccer cleats and packed my pill organizer, my paperback, and the blue cardigan my daughter always said made me look like myself. I wanted to belong to the picture they kept promising. 2 days earlier, she had called all honeyed and bright, said they were doing a little family weekend, said it would be easier for everyone if I came along. I heard dishes clatter behind her, a baby fuss, the comfortable noise of a house that had room for me, at least in theory. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I left my apartment tidy, trash out, kettle rinsed, a note to my neighbor about watering the fern. The bus ride across town smelled like wet coats and old gum. I pressed the pie to my lap and watched my stop creep closer, the kind of hopeful you don't admit out loud because it might scare the thing away. They pulled up in a gray SUV that needed a wash. The kids were in the back with headphones on. My son-in-law leaned across the console and said traffic would be ugly, better to make one quick stop first. My daughter reached back, touched my wrist, said there was a small mix-up with the rental, said the motel by the freeway would be cozy for tonight. She made it sound like a misprint on a flyer. Nothing you couldn't smooth with a smile. I climbed in carefully, setting the cobbler between my feet. We drove past the park I thought we'd visit in the morning, past a grocery store where I imagined we'd pick out coffee and oranges together. I kept filling the silence with plans that never got born. At the motel she moved fast. Keys signed, bag scooped, the pie passed to the clerk for the breakfast bar. She said the room would let me rest after the drive, said they'd get the kids settled and swing back. Her husband hovered by the door, already turned toward the parking lot. I asked if they wanted me to keep the cash for the cleats. She shook her head and said she'd take it now, just to check sizes online. She smiled the way people do when they're already somewhere else. They walked me to the stairs, promised tomorrow. I believed them because I wanted to. They didn't forget me, they planned around me. And I carried that pie smell up to room 12B like a ticket that wouldn't scan. I went back to the lobby because the room felt like a held breath. The night clerk had changed, tall kid with a buzz cut and a name tag that said Evan. I asked if the breakfast started early, just to say something ordinary. He slid a paper map across the counter and, without quite looking at me, said the Continental started at 6. When he reached for a pen, a yellow sticky note clung to his sleeve. He peeled it off, meant to toss it, then hesitated. He said the daughter had left it with the day clerk. His eyes moved between the note and my face like he was weighing a small risk. I didn't reach for it. I just waited. He finally set it on the counter. Room 12B. One night only. No room phone access. We'll handle checkout. The handwriting was my daughter's, quick, pretty decisive. That was the moment the floor stopped pretending to be solid. Family doesn't misplace you. It files you under later. I asked if there was a payphone. He said there wasn't, but I could use the desk line if I kept it short. I dialed my own number first, hoping the vibration would point me to where they'd put my phone. It rang once, then flipped to my daughter's cheerful voice on her voicemail greeting. Like the device had already changed hands. I hung up before the beep. The air outside was wet and chemical, the kind you taste. A convenience store blinked across the lot. Inside, a teenage cashier in a hoodie leaned over a display case of lighters. I asked if I could borrow the store tablet for a minute to check a bus schedule. He said the manager would kill him, then slid it closer anyway. He said 5 minutes. I opened my Facebook without thinking, muscle memory more than plan. At the top of the feed was my daughter's story. The kids in matching pajamas at home, a candle burning on the coffee table, my cobbler on a plate with a caption, "Finally a quiet weekend, just us 4. A friend had commented, "Did you get your mom settled?" My daughter had replied, "Yep. She's fine. Needed the rest. We'll swing by Monday." Monday. Not tomorrow. Not one night. Monday. I set the tablet down carefully, as if the screen could bruise. The cashier asked if I had found what I needed. I said I had. He offered a paper cup of water from the soda fountain and added, almost whispering, that his own grandma lived 2 towns over. I told him to call her tonight. I walked back slow, the parking lot puddles winking like little lies. I wasn't lost. I was parked. They didn't forget me, they scheduled me out. The next morning I woke before the alarm. The kind of wakefulness that doesn't come from rest, but from knowing something is about to change. The motel curtains leaked thin stripes of light across the carpet. I packed slowly, not because I had much, but because leaving without a plan felt like running away. I wasn't running. I was walking towards something. The diner across the street was already open. Chrome stools, a smell of bacon grease that clung to your clothes. I slid into a booth by the window. The waitress was older than me by maybe 5 years, hair set in rollers and sprayed stiff. Her name tag said March. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. "Yes, please. And some toast." She poured until the cup was nearly brimming. "Passing through." I smiled without looking up. "Something like that." She left me with my coffee and a tiny slip of paper tucked under the saucer. Not the check, a note. "Room 12B? You all right?" I looked up sharply, but she was already behind the counter, refilling a trucker's mug. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Maybe kindness still recognized me even here. Halfway through my toast, I pulled the bus schedule from my purse. I'd marked 3 departures. 1 east, 1 north, one that would drop me in a town I hadn't visited in 40 years. I traced the lines on the paper like they were escape routes on a map from a burning building. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then played it back. My son's wife's voice, smooth as glass. "Mary, hope you're doing okay. We'll be back Monday. Don't check out early, it's all paid for." It wasn't cruelty. Cruelty has edges you can grab. This was insulation. I was being wrapped in the kind of care you give a package you don't want to break but also don't want to open. I paid in cash and walked out into the kind of morning that makes you think the world forgot your grief. Blue sky, warm breeze, even the traffic sounded polite. At the motel I stood outside my door for a long time, key in hand. I could go back in, close it behind me, wait like they told me to. Instead, I slipped the key into the night drop at the office. I didn't slam the door. I just didn't close it behind me. By noon, I was at the public library 2 blocks down. It was cool inside, the air smelling faintly of old paper and floor polish. I claimed a computer in the back corner where no one could look over my shoulder. The keyboard clacked under my fingers as I typed in my online banking login. The numbers on the screen didn't surprise me, because I'd already braced for them. My checking account, the one my pension landed in, was nearly empty. The last withdrawals were 2 transfers made after midnight to an account in my daughter's name. They were labeled family expenses. Family. The word felt different when it showed up in a ledger. I closed the tab and pulled from my bag a small, navy passbook from another bank entirely. One my husband and I had opened decades ago, back when we thought emergency fund meant car repairs or new appliances. I'd kept it quiet, not out of malice but because sometimes survival is quieter when no one knows what you have. The balance wasn't large, but it was enough to buy choices, and choices were what I'd been starved of. I sat back, feeling the hum of the library's air conditioning in my bones. Across the room, a man in a denim jacket was explaining the copier to a boy who couldn't have been older than 10. The boy's laughter cracked the stillness, and something in me softened. Not all connections fray. Some are still worth holding. I printed a bus ticket for the following morning. Paid cash at the front desk. The librarian didn't ask questions. Just slid the receipt toward me, and smiled the way strangers sometimes do when they sense you're standing on the edge of a decision. On my walk back to the motel, I passed a pawn shop. In the window, a small ceramic lamp caught my eye. Ivory glaze with a blue shade. It reminded me of the one in my old living room, before everything was packed away. I didn't buy it, but I stood there long enough to feel something I hadn't in weeks want. When I reached my room, the phone was ringing again. I let it ring. They'd taken my money without asking. But I'd kept the one thing they didn't know I still had, an exit. And tomorrow I'd use it. That night I didn't bother pulling the motel curtains closed. The glow from the street lamps painted a pale rectangle on the carpet, and I lay on top of the covers, staring at it like it was a doorway I hadn't stepped through yet. When the clock struck 6 the next morning, I was already dressed. Navy slacks, white blouse, the jacket I used to wear to the bank when I still worked the counter. I folded my nightgown, slid it into my bag, and zipped the passbook into the side pocket. Then I reached for the small manila envelope I'd taken from the bottom drawer of my desk at home, the one marked simply Rivers. Inside was my lawyer's card, a copy of my will, and a list of accounts and beneficiaries I'd updated after my husband died. I'd kept it neat in case life decided to surprise me again. The bus depot was 10 minutes away. I walked there instead of calling a cab. The early air smelled faintly of cut grass and diesel. People kept their eyes on their phones, shuffling forward in line, no one looking for a story in the woman carrying a single overnight bag. At the counter, I slid the clerk my ticket and asked for the earliest departure to Fairfield. He glanced at the schedule and nodded. Bus leaves in 20. I bought a coffee from the vending machine and stood by the far window. Fairfield wasn't home. It wasn't anywhere I had ties. But it had one thing I needed. My lawyer's office and the quiet anonymity of a town where no one knew my name. The ride was 2 hours. I didn't look out the window much. Instead, I pulled the passbook into my lap, tracing the embossed letters with my thumb. That account wasn't just money, it was proof I'd thought of myself, even when I didn't act on it. When the bus hissed to a stop, I walked 3 blocks to Rivers and McKinley. The receptionist recognized my name and offered tea while I waited. I declined. My voice was steady when I told Alan Rivers I wanted to revoke my daughter's power of attorney, remove her from all beneficiary designations, and update the will. He didn't ask why. I was grateful for that. In less than an hour, the signatures were dry, the documents sealed in an envelope, and my life, at least on paper, was mine again. No warning. No discussion. Just done. I left the law office with the envelope tucked under my arm, the weight of it steadier than any hand I'd been offered lately. The bus back to the motel didn't leave for another hour, so I walked. Fairfield was the kind of town where storefront windows still carried painted lettering, and everyone seemed to know where they were headed. I wasn't sure if I belonged among them yet, but the air felt lighter. Halfway down Main Street, I ducked into a small bakery. The bell over the door jingled, and the scent of cinnamon and butter wrapped around me. Behind the counter, a young woman with a braid down her back wiped her hands on her apron. "What can I get for you?" she asked. "A black coffee and one of those scones," I said, pointing. She poured the coffee, slid the pastry into a paper bag, then studied me for a beat too long. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," I said, meeting her eyes. Her voice softened. You look like someone who finally chose herself. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I didn't. But I carried her words to a small table by the window. I ate slowly, sipping the coffee until it cooled. Outside, a mother guided a toddler across the crosswalk, her free hand balancing a grocery bag. The simple rhythm of other people's lives felt like a language I used to speak. When I finished, the young woman brought me a paper cup for the road on the house. Safe travels, she said. I nodded, unsure if she meant for today or for whatever came next. The bus ride back felt shorter, though maybe it was just that my mind had stopped circling the same questions. At the depot, a man in a rumpled suit offered to carry my bag down the steps. I let him. He smiled faintly and said, "You've got that look, like someone just handed you a key." "Maybe they did," I replied. By the time I walked into the motel room, the air felt different. Not warmer, not colder, just mine for as long as I decided to stay. I set the bakery cup on the nightstand beside the passbook and the envelope. They thought they'd left me in limbo. But strangers were starting to see me, and I was starting to see myself. It was late afternoon when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, the kind that assume you'll answer. I knew before I opened the door it wouldn't be housekeeping. My daughter stood there, hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head like she just stepped out of a boutique instead of a car. She didn't bother with hello. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" she asked. "You took it," I said. My voice was even, not raised. Her lips tightened. "We came back early. Thought you'd be ready." "Ready for what?" She glanced past me into the room, scanning like she expected to see my bag packed and my coat over the chair. "For us to pick you up." I stepped aside but didn't invite her in. She stayed in the doorway. The silence between us stretched until she filled it. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "I'm not making anything. I just stopped following instructions." She shifted her weight, clearly impatient. "You can't just disappear on us, Mom." "I didn't disappear," I said. "I stopped returning." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You don't understand the quiet you hear right now. That's what it sounds like when the person who always showed up doesn't." For a second, her face softened, but only for a second. "We were trying to give you space." "You gave me an address," I replied. "That's not the same thing." She exhaled through her nose, like the conversation was a task she hadn't budgeted for. "Look, let's just go. The kids are in the car." I shook my head. "Not today." Her expression shifted from annoyance to something closer to disbelief. "You can't mean that." "I do," I said, closing the door halfway. "And I think you knew I would, eventually." She stood there a moment longer, as if waiting for the old reflex, to apologize, to step toward her, to make it easy. I didn't. When I finally closed the door, the latch clicked with a sound I'd never noticed before. Final, not fragile. I leaned against the frame, steady. Now she knew. This was the sound of my absence. By Monday, they were calling from numbers I didn't recognize. Some went to voicemail, others rang until they gave up. I let them stack one on top of the other, like unopened mail. I'd already handled the only paperwork that mattered. At the library, I logged into my bank again. The transfers they'd made were still visible, but my main account now showed almost nothing, because I'd moved the remainder into that old passbook account and then closed the online access. No one but me could touch it now. I walked to the post office and mailed the updated will and legal papers to a safe deposit box in Fairfield. My lawyer had suggested it, saying it would keep things clean if anyone tried to contest later. Clean was the right word. By mid-afternoon, I saw my son's name flash on the motel phone. I picked it up and listened without speaking. "Mom? We're trying to find you. Can you at least tell us where you are?" I stayed silent. He kept talking, voice tight. "This isn't fair. You can't just cut us out." That was when I realized they weren't looking for me, they were looking for access. Back in my room, I packed the few things I had. The bakery cup went into the trash. The passbook and envelope went into my bag. I slipped the motel key into the drop box again, the same way I had the morning I walked out without closing the door. The bus depot was quiet. I bought a one-way ticket west to a city where I knew no one and no one knew me. As the bus pulled out, I watched the motel shrink in the distance until it was just another low building by the highway. They might still be calling. They might still be driving around, checking places they think I'd go. But I'd already gone where they couldn't follow legally, financially, and finally emotionally. For years, I'd been the one who showed up. The one who bent schedules, stretched paychecks, made room. Now they would have to learn how to live without that. I didn't take revenge. I took myself. The bus rolled into the city just as the sun was sinking, turning the glass buildings into sheets of copper. I stepped off with my bag, the air thick with the smell of rain on hot pavement. No one was waiting. That was the point. I found a small studio apartment 2 blocks from a grocery store and across the street from a park. The landlord was a wiry man with kind eyes who didn't ask for references, just first month's rent in cash. I signed the lease with a hand that didn't shake. The next morning I walked to the corner market, bought flour, sugar, butter, and cinnamon. Back in the kitchen, just a narrow strip of counter and an oven older than I was, I unpacked the groceries with care. The smell of baking filled the room like a memory I'd decided to keep for myself. I set the pie on the windowsill to cool, steam curling into the late afternoon light. Outside, kids chased a ball across the grass, their laughter carrying up to my second-floor window. None of them were mine. That didn't make the sound any less sweet. On the table sat the passbook, the legal envelope, and a bus schedule folded neatly in half. I didn't know if I'd ever need to use it again, but it felt good to have the choice. I poured coffee into a mug, the kind that fits perfectly in your hands, and sat by the window. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Somewhere, maybe that same afternoon, they were still telling the story of how I'd left. Maybe they were softening it for the kids. Maybe they were spinning it for friends. It didn't matter. The truth didn't need their permission to exist. I took a slow sip, let the bitterness settle on my tongue. In that stillness, I understood something simple. You don't always have to slam the door to end a chapter. Sometimes you just stop walking back through it. The pie cooled. The coffee cooled. The day drifted toward evening. And I thought, not with anger but with the clarity of someone who's finally stepped out of the frame. Sometimes love is nothing more than the decision to stop explaining. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.